What's up, heathens? How y'all doing? Today we are interviewing Suris the Skeptic. He was at the Faithless Forum, and I'm really glad he made it. Actually, it was the first time that I'd really seen you, met you, or heard about your channel. So, I mean, you got a new subscriber from the forum, just right there. So, we're going to be talking with him today about his religious past, as well as, what made him come out as an atheist or become an atheist, either one. Then we'll do a little bit of a retrospective, and then we'll talk about his channel a little bit. So if you're interested in that, then please stay tuned. Well, now let's start off with talking about your religious past. Now, were you religious at one time?
Oh yeah, for a good 23 years.
Okay,
I was.
So, what religion did you start off in, and did you change religions in that time?
I was always a non-denominational Christian, with probably the most emphasis on Southern Baptist, just because that's where we happen to live. Those were the churches that you see most predominantly around Pensacola, Florida. But I grew up in a Christian private school, and that school, in order to get more people in so they could get more funding from the people who paid to get them into the school, we ended up having pretty much every denomination you could think of. So I was exposed at a very early age to everybody from Catholics to Methodists to Pentecostals, who would give me a little bit of information on what their beliefs were. But for the most part, we all just were Christians. We were non-denominational evangelicals.
Okay. That's always been interesting to me, like the non-denominational evangelicals. I guess that's just, did you just not adhere to any single one? Like, down here in the South, non-denominational really just meant we're Baptist. We don't want to say we're Baptist, but we're Baptist.
and I think that's where it stems from with me as well, where I said that the most influence came from Baptist churches, because I know Florida's not really the South. It's kind of like the South, but with tourism. Mm-hmm. So the majority of the churches there are also Baptist churches, but even then, your non-denominational Christians just go, we read the Bible, we follow the Ten Commandments, we essentially cherry pick the pieces of the word that we like, and then we go through it. Now, nobody who's a non-denominational Christian is going to be open and honest with you that they literally cherry pick their beliefs out of the Bible, but I don't think any sect of Christianity is going to be honest with you about that.
No, I really don't think so. They're pretty much, in general, anti-cherry picking, but yet they cherry pick at the same time.
You take everything out of context, but you literally chopped that verse up to make it palatable.
Now, I'm wondering, how involved were you in religion, in your younger years?
Very. We went to church, not in my formative years, just because we couldn't afford it. We didn't have a lot of money growing up, and pretty much all of the money that my mom had, she spent into getting me into private school. And to this day, I'm still iffy about how I feel about that. But we didn't have a lot of money to drive around and do a lot of things. So early on, most of my, I guess, theology teaching was from school. And then during summer, we had a summer camp as well, not just like Vacation Bible School, but a full on, you're out of school, but you're going to school in the summer to learn more Christianity. They had a campus for that literally across the pond from where the actual school itself was. But once we started going to church, it was, every Wednesday night, every Sunday, every Saturday, or not Saturday, every Sunday morning and night. Sunday Bible school, as well as we had an entire class teaching about end times through the book of Revelations that I was really involved in, because as a kid growing up in a Christian private school, there's one book series that everybody read, and that was Left Behind. So when I was offered to take a class on Revelations, I was like, oh, hell yeah, I'll totally do that. So in my early years, also in my neighborhood, we actually had a traveling group of, I guess you would call them urban missionaries, who would gather up the kids in the neighborhood and bring them to the local park and give them sermons on Saturdays. So it was everywhere, and okay. I was very involved.
Well, I'm kind of curious, these urban missionaries that apparently drove around, I guess, white panel trucks and just were handing out Bibles like, hey, kid, You want the Lord Jesus Christ inside you. What kid would honestly get in that white panel van? I mean, I could,
Well,
like,
see, the
you
thing
want
is- the thing
candy?
is that they-
Yes.
The thing is that they actually weren't driving around in a white panel van. What they would do is they would park their car at the actual park itself, and then they would go around and manually walk around the neighborhood, knock on doors, and say, "Hey, we're having a sermon in an hour over at the park." And then either the parents would drive their kids there, or the kids would walk there, and you'd get probably about 30 people every now and again. Anywhere between 20 and 30 kids would be out there just at the, under a gazebo in the park listening to the sermon. And they would do things like make it really interactive, to where while they were teaching, they would ask people questions, and whoever answered the most questions right throughout the sermon, at the end, they would have this little shoebox of prizes where you could get anything from like one of those little green New Testament Bibles, to a tract, I almost said it was a chick tract. But literally just any piece of Jesus memorabilia you could pull out of the box and say, yeah, you answered the most questions in regards to religion today. You get a thing out of the box.
Wow. I mean, I don't know. Even if I was a Christian and I, had my son now, somebody came up, knocked on my door, was like, "Hey, we're going to be preaching about Christ over here," I would still be like, "I don't know there. Maybe you should get in your weird, ominous van and leave."
We don't like your kind around here, but I'm Christian too. Yeah, I don't believe in the no true Scotsman fallacy.
But yeah, so they going back to your experience though, they would have like end times classes for kids. Like, would they preach like the whole
church?
Huh?
At my particular church, they did. The pastor, he would have his regular Sunday service, and then you did Sunday school if you were a kid, but if you were a teenager or an adult, instead of Sunday school, you could opt in to take end times classes instead with the pastor's brother. And he would hold those before sermons as well. And sometimes they would go maybe like 10 minutes into the sermon, so you'd be able to cut off the first 10 minutes of the sermon, which I always considered a plus. But that's, that was just me. Even as a Christian, going to church meant I was sitting down and not playing video games, and that was really, really terrible.
I mean, it really does just baffle me, like the fact that they would do this, to like have the end times classes for kids, because I mean the end times thing really, really is not, I would say, like something that you should teach kids. I don't know. That seems like advanced Christianity to me. See,
you say that, but I still have the 40 Left Behind Kids series books sitting in my bookshelf under there. The camera can't see it, but if I was masochistic enough to get up and grab them, I could.
Well, I mean, it just seems like, and then Jesus took all of the Christians to heaven and let the sinners burn in hell. And
then there were the pastors that were fake about their faith, and they're going to get tortured and beheaded.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I still remember very bits and pieces of that story. But what really bothers me as an adult is that since they made a kids version of the Left Behind series, it made me not only really interested in that end times class, but it felt like it kind of further indoctrinated you, because now there was this fiction story that was really cool and really compelling and decently well written, at least from a kid's perspective. And now you were like, oh, I want to learn more about the stuff behind this story, so let me go take this class on end times prophecy in the Bible, not even realizing that literally made you an apocalyptic death cult.
Well, okay. So, bit of a side note from the interview here, but I actually, like, the Left Behind series really fucked me up one morning, okay? Because here I am, I'm like in middle school, I believe. I get up on a Saturday morning and I turn on my TV, and I don't know what channel I was watching, but I like turned the channel and it landed on this, and it was like a news report where it was reporting the end times, like the apocalypse.
Oh
and
my God.
It looked literal, and it was the Left Behind series, like I think it was like one of the first movies or whatnot. Like it looked like a legit news report, and I was like, holy shit, is it fucking happening? What am I gonna do? Who do I need to kill for supplies?
I actually had a similar situation, unfortunately. So my mom had to leave for a business meeting one day, and so she literally like while I was at school, she had stripped off her clothes and just changed into business attire and left. And, I had a house key, so whenever I got off the bus, I could just open my door and go in. So I come home, and the first thing I see is my mom's clothes just on the couch, laying as if she had been sitting on the couch. So the way that they portray it in Left Behind is that, the bodies come up through the clothes and the clothes fall down. So I had this image that, holy crap, my mom was raptured and I'm not a true Christian somehow. So in a panic, I started calling my friends, and just by coincidence, the first two people that I called did not pick up. So when I called my friend Corey, he didn't pick up. We went to the same private school, and I called my friend Matt, who had gone to that private school as well. He didn't pick up. So then I called my friend Andy, who did not go to PCA, because this was by the time I had gone into public school. I call Andy, and he picks up. And so to me, that even further confirms it. I'm like, God damn it, the one heathen picks up. And I'm like, Andy, is your mom anywhere? Because if memory serves, his mom was Catholic. And just like, Andy, is your mom anywhere? He's like, yeah, she's right in the living room. Why? And I'm like, I think the rapture just happened, and I'm panicking. And then, of course, I hear the door open, and my mom comes through the door, and I'm like, oh, God damn it. And she's like, no, I was told I had to go to this business meeting 2 hours ago, and I didn't have time to, get everything put away. I just had to strip and go. And I'm just like, wow, this is really fucking embarrassing.
No, well, I mean, it's like I got to touch the indoctrination kind of situation. Like it's really crazy, because I mean, in that particular mindset, I mean, that's a real possibility. It's a real fear, being left behind, not being a true Christian, because there's no way to know which version of Christianity is true or real or whatever.
Oh yeah, it's terrifying as a kid, because you can't really separate those things. Even some adults can't separate those things in their head. It's really sad.
Yeah. Well, was there anything else from your childhood? Like, did your family participate like in those, like, I guess, playground sermons for kids?
They didn't participate. Most of the time on weekends, my mom was working or out of town, or otherwise predisposed. If she had the rare opportunity to be home, she wasn't necessarily going out and doing any of that. For the most part, she was at home and working there, because she ran an at-home business. She was an insurance agent, so she was at home, she was gathering leads, and if she wasn't at home, she was outside doing presentations. So for the most part, it was just me being really, really into my faith and going, no, I'm going to go to these because it's going to show that I love Jesus and that I won't burn in hell. Yeah.
Wow.
But yeah, for me, I wanted to be a theologian for a long time. I think from age 6, I wanted to be a missionary, and then from age 12, I wanted to be a theologian instead, because the idea of being sent to some place like Uganda stopped appealing to me. But when I was like, well, maybe I'll just study the Bible really hard, so I'll be a theologian. Not even realizing that being a theologian means you're probably going to research more than just the one religion. And oddly enough, my grandpa was one of the main reasons that I ended up having that first little wedge of doubt in my faith. Because when I was like, yeah, I'm going to study the Bible, and the King James Version is the real version of the Bible, because that just so happened to be what our school used. And my grandpa's like, are you sure about that? Granted, he was a God-believing Christian too. But he would just say, are you sure about that? Come back to me in a few years and we'll have this conversation again. And then as I studied the Bible, I realized that, wait a minute, the King James Version was written in the 1600s. There's no fucking way this could be the original.
Yeah, it always gets me when they act like the King James Version is the perfect edition of the Bible. When, I mean, not only was it written then, but also the Bible in general was cobbled together like in the 300s.
Wow, what was I going to say? I can't even remember what it was called now.
Council of Nicaea?
Council of Nicaea, yes. After Constantine converted everything. Yes.
Yeah. I'm wanting to say, I don't know if it was the one that it's commonly referenced to. I know there's one of the councils that happened where they just determined that the Bible was inspired by God or written by God, or was God's word or whatever. Like that was the primary reason for it. And then there was another one that actually solidified like what was in the Bible or something. I think
they had the. I think there were, the last time I talked with one of my older roommates about this, he said that there were 3 councils.
Yeah.
I need to go back and do the research again, maybe compile a video on it. But yeah, there were multiple councils. One was for in the inspired divinity of the word, and the other ones were, let's vote to see if the Gospel of Judas should be in here. The Gospel of Jesus, Jesus was really important, but I think Paul was more important. So we're going to include everything Paul wrote and then 7 letters he didn't write. But we're going to call them all Paul. We're going to put them in here. But, that Jesus guy, let's not put his in. It's really weird when you think about it.
It really is. So, after all of this, like, when did you actually start questioning, like, your religion, questioning what you had been taught?
So I spent a decent bit of time just kind of going, well, the Bible isn't a reliable source for anything, but I still believe in Jesus. And I'm still not sure if it's because I legitimately believed in God or if it's because at that point I was just trying to give myself a safety net to not burn in hell. I'm not really certain which one of the two it was, but I still, whenever somebody asked me, what do you believe? I said, I believe in the Judeo-Christian God. Like that was my exact response every time. But later, I want to say, around the time I was about 22, 23, I finally started actually researching religion again, stopped being passive on it. And when I started researching it again, that's when I started to find, all those little wedges that had been driven into my faith growing up. They started finally chipping away at that foundation. Because at that point, I started going, oh, wait a minute. So not only is the Bible not exactly a reliable source for things, but Christians have destroyed entire cultures. Oh, that's really awkward. Well, what about other religions? There might be other ones that are not quite Buddhists massacre Muslims. Okay. Well, what about the Muslims? They can't. Well, they teach gay people flying lessons off buildings. Maybe I just don't want to be part of a religion. That looks like a lot of baggage. So yeah, it's just the more I research, the more harm it looked like religion did, and I just started to disassociate myself. Even with that fear of hellfire that still somewhat sits there with me today, I guess looking at the harm of it finally drove me far enough away that I can go, even if that's the case, it doesn't stop the harm that actually happens in the real world as a result of it. Mm-hmm. And then when I started listening to people like Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens, Holy Kool-Aid, just pretty much most of your anti-theist activists or atheist activists, when you start listening to their works and then going back and reading some things like, the Historicity of Jesus by Richard Carey or listening to Aaron Ra, start to realize that not only does religion cause harm, and there's a lot of demonstrable harm that it does, but there's just not a lot of evidence for a God, period. Like, even a deistic God, you might even be able to prove some of those someday, but in regards to Yahweh, in regards to Allah, Vishnu, Shiva, all of them just end up falling really, really short and looking like they're made by humans. So just after doing a lot of research, it just looked like it was all bullshit.
So, would it be correct to say that what drove you away from the idea of religion was the conduct of religious people rather than the doctrine?
Not necessarily. See, I have, and I've said this on my channel before, my problem isn't necessarily theists, but theism. I guess in the beginning, there were some parts where I was just like, no, there are people who do things that are bad, and they're misrepresenting their doctrine. But then when you actually read the Quran, you go, oh, they actually do believe that women are worth only one half of what a man is. And at that point, you start to go, well, maybe it's not the people all the time. The doctrine does have these really hateful messages in it. So for me, a lot of it was the doctrine is false. Why would you believe the doctrine? It's half the reason why I sat there for a while saying, no, I believe in Jesus, but I don't believe in the Bible. I think the Bible's bullshit, but I believed in Jesus because I think that the doctrine itself is harmful.
Well, I'm wondering, since you were like, I believe in Jesus, but I don't believe the Bible. Like, what did you feel like you knew about Jesus at that point? Like, if you were rejecting the Bible, I mean, what do you think you actually knew about Jesus?
Honestly, looking back at it, it was probably just a lot of compartmentalizing in my head, where the little bubble in my mind that had Jesus and the Bible in one spot, it was almost like that bubble split and the Bible completely ejected, but Jesus kind of stayed there. And I didn't really have a good justification for it. Like, if somebody were to ask me, like, if I were to go back in time and ask myself 6-7 years ago, do you believe in Jesus? And I said yes, and I asked why, I wouldn't have a good reason outside of the Bible, but I had already rejected the Bible at that point, so I wouldn't have a good reason at all. I would probably have defaulted onto something like, oh, well, historians have proven that Jesus exists. And like, well, there are historians that are mythicists now that don't believe that. So I would have fallen flat on my face had somebody like Anthony Montebosco asked me about my faith.
Well, so was there, like, so did any particular, like, religious doctrine of Christianity, like, did any of it, like, really stick out to you as, like, oh yeah, this really got me questioning it? Or
yeah, a lot of Leviticus.
Okay.
A good amount of Leviticus. I believe it's in Timothy as well, when Paul says his little bits about how women aren't supposed to speak in the church. Mm-hmm. And my mom was a Sunday school teacher, so when we actually started going to church, she was a Sunday school teacher there. So you can imagine the little conflict that has in my mind, where I'm hearing Paul, who wrote most of the doctrines we used in Christianity, saying women shouldn't speak in the church, having a mom who spoke in the church. Not to mention, I had a lot of really awkward battles with stuff like homophobia. I used to be vehemently homophobic, and now I have no problem with it at all. But back when I had to justify everything with my book, I had to go, well, no, in Leviticus it says these things about homosexuals. They're obviously evil, which is definitely not the case. I can go back and look at myself and go, I was a fucking idiot. Not only that, but I was a hateful idiot. Going back and looking at verses like Leviticus, when I started realizing around high school that I actually had a friend who called me out on being a homophobe, because I didn't even know that was a term at the time. Because you have to remember, when you're brought up in a church setting or a private school setting, that's not a word you hear, because that's already the norm. There's not just a term for it. Mm-hmm. But when my friend called me out on that, and I had to go back and look at the Bible again, and went, no, he's right. I'm being hateful towards another human being. That's not right at all. That's horrible. I'm being stupid. But then I had to try to justify the scriptures in Leviticus that were homophobic. The two just didn't line up. So when you've got stuff like, my mom's speaking in the church and Paul says not to, and I'm not homophobic anymore, but the Bible's telling me in Leviticus that I should be. And I hadn't even gotten into the stuff in Exodus about slavery. I didn't even know about that until I had become an atheist, mm-hmm. Which is really weird that I knew more about the Bible after the fact. But that seems to be the case with a lot of people, strangely enough. But just verses like that just stop making any sense. And then the whole Bible starts to fall apart. If it's all the inerrant word of God and you're having to start throw bits and pieces of it out, at some point you just kind of have to throw the baby out with the bathwater.